Hello and welcome to Pots and Trowels. You may wonder why I'm cutting the grass and it's nearly the end of September. Well, it's because the lawns are still growing, so while ever they're growing we need to keep cutting them little and often to help thicken them up. And we will be looking at lawn maintenance in October, so join us for that. But this week we're going to be taking shrub cuttings, we're going to be getting the compost heaps ready for all the autumn waste, we're going to be cutting back pelargoniums, and I've just spotted something that needs my immediate attention. And this is it. This is the urgent job. This is a lovely tree called a liquid amber. Has beautiful variegated foliage, this variety, but it also colours up in the autumn in about another month, 6 weeks time. But I've noticed it's got a green shoot growing out of it there. And that's a problem with some variegated plants. They have this problem and tendency to revert back to their parent plant. So what we need to do is cut that out, and it's really important on anything that's deciduous that loses its leaves, because once the leaves have fallen off we don't know which is the branch. So I'm glad I spotted that, so I'm going to get my secateurs, trace it back to where we've got a variegated shoot which is there, and then I'm just going to make a nice clean cut, and that's that gone. That can be disposed of, and that will now fill in the gap. One of our viewers has sent us a message via Facebook asking if we can show you how to take shrub cuttings. So that's exactly what we're going to do now. Because this is a perfect time of the year for taking cuttings of all sorts of shrubs in the garden, deciduous shrubs and evergreen shrubs. And they're what we call semi-hardwood or semi-ripe cuttings. And that's the difference between when they're really soft and sappy in early summer on that new growth, and then in the winter when the leaves have fallen off and they go really woody. So this is that in-between stage. And if you see the branch there, you can see it's not really soft and sappy now. It's got some firmness to it. So these make really good cuttings, and they root fairly easily. So what I'm going to do is take a selection from the garden of all sorts of shrubs, and then we're going to prepare them and get them to root, so we've got lots of new plants for next year. So all I'm going to do is cut some lengths off about 3 or 4 inches long, just cutting them off above a bud so we don't get a die back there. That will grow next year, and this will make our cutting. So I'm going to keep myself busy for a couple of minutes just whizzing around the garden getting some cuttings. So to prepare the cuttings is really simple. Now you can either use a very sharp knife to do it or a pair of secateurs. Depends on the material we're trimming. It can sometimes get a little bit woody. If you feel that it's a little bit too hard to cut with a knife, then use a pair of secateurs. And I've cut it below a leaf joint and I'm removing the leaves, and I want to cut in no longer than that. In fact, I'm actually going to make that one just a little bit shorter, because sometimes shorter cuttings root better than big cuttings. This one is a hebe. It's still got a few old flowers on, so we just cut it below a leaf joint, and then we're going to remove any flowers, and we're also going to remove the leaves, just leaving a few at the top. We don't want to leave too many leaves on there. And then we can insert them. So that's our cuttings prepared. Just going back to this one, this is a deutzia, and it's got quite a large pair of leaves at the top. So what I'm going to do with that one is just reduce the leaf area so that it doesn't wilt, and that prevents it from drooping when we put it in. So now we've got our cuttings prepared. If I can find my little dibber, I'm going to put them in a cell tray, a plastic cell tray that I've reused lots of times. It's a compost and perlite mix to get good drainage, and then I'm going to make a hole and just push them down. I'm not using any rooting compounds at all. These should root perfectly well without. So push them into the compost, little dibber, push that in and firm it in. And then we can put the Physocarpus, this lovely purple one, in, prepared in exactly the same way. Just push them in so that they're firm but not compacted, and then we can put this little hebe sapphire. This is a lovely compact hebe, grows to about 2 feet tall, and it flowers and flowers and flowers with lilac coloured flowers all through the summer. And then lastly we're going to put in Senecio Sunshine, now called Brachyglottis, but I still call it Senecio. And then what we need to do with those when we've got them all in is to give them a drink. It's important that we work fairly quickly so they don't wilt. So I'm just going to hold it there. We want the water to settle the cuttings in so the compost is nice and moist. That's really important because they will drink that up like a cut flower. And then we've got to put them somewhere fairly cool and shady. We certainly don't want them in the direct sun, even at this time of the year, and get quite hot, especially in a greenhouse. So somewhere shady, maybe one of these little cloches over the top, just to keep the moisture in there, and piece of newspaper, and then that is it. If you have got a propagator, that's even better, but you don't need a lot of heat at this time of the year. We want to keep the tops cool so they don't wilt. And what you can do every day or so, take that off, give them a mist so it creates lovely humid conditions, and they will take a while to root. They're going to take probably a couple of months to root, so you've got to be patient, but at this time of the year they do tend to work, and we'll get lovely rooted plug plants that we can pot up next year. We've also had another question from a viewer asking about compost bins, and it's something we will cover in more depth later on and at different times of the year. But basically we need to get ready now for the autumn, and I've got two very simple bins here, just made with some trellis. It's open trellis so we get good airflow through it, and I have a front on which I've just taken off. But basically I've got in here the remains of what was put in there at the end of the winter and early spring, and this was a mixture of grass clippings, vegetable waste, leaves out the garden, and as you can see it's rotted down and made a really friable compost, which is perfect now for adding to the garden. So what I intend to do is to take all of that out, and that will go onto the vegetable garden where I'm going to grow my onions next year. So I'm going to clear this bin out, and then in this bin what I've been doing over the summer is just adding everything. There's a bit of grass cuttings in there, there's all the vegetable waste, sweet peas, courgette, foliage, carrots, everything is piled in. I'm going to transfer it from this bin into this bin, and in doing so it will mix all these ingredients together in there, firm it down, put the front back on, and then that will start to do its job. Leaves me with an empty bin so that when the leaves start falling and we clear out the vegetable garden in a few weeks time, that will go in there. So by winter I'll have two bins that are really starting to rot down to make compost for next year. But we will cover it in more detail at a later date, but that just gives you an idea. Get the bins ready now ready for autumn. And just to finish off this week, we're going to prune the pelargonium. Now the type of pelargoniums we prune at this time of the year are the lovely scented leaved ones. This is a rose scented one, or the regal pelargoniums, so not the zonal types. And the reason we cut them down is because it makes them bush out and make a bigger plant for next year. And it's really easy to do. It looks quite drastic, so literally it's a case of getting in with your secateurs and cutting really hard back. If you can cut to a little bud, all the better. But don't worry, and that is it. It's really drastic looking. What we would do now is bring this indoors to a greenhouse or a conservatory, just frost free, keep it moist, and that will make a nice bushy head of new growth. And as a bonus, with what you've cut off, you could actually trim those and make some cuttings, and they'll root at this time of the year. If you just put them in a small pot of compost, just trim them like most cuttings just below a leaf joint, put them in a pot, they will root, and you've got some fresh plants next year as well as your original plant that'll be nice and bushy. Thank you to Cobra for sponsoring these videos, and thank you to you for watching, especially Robin and Rich for their 2 questions about the compost heap and taking shrub cuttings. And if you've got any queries that you'd like answering, then please get in touch with us via social media and we'll do our best to include them in a future video. See you next week.